Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. Thanks for joining me in another episode of Keep It Real. So if you've been following the natural medicine industry and certainly the supplement industry, you've probably heard of something called MCTs or MCT oil or MCT powder. And so I thought I'd just give you a quick primer on what that means and how it's used and kind of the mechanism of how it works in the body. So MCT stands for medium chain triglyceride. And they call it medium chain because there's also short chain and long chain. So the short chain fatty acids or short chain triglycerides are basically either 1 to 5 carbons long. So it might say, you might read something that says C1 or C2 up to C5. Those are short chain fatty acids. Probably the most well-known one is called butyric acid or butyrate. And butyrate is a really key sort of food or nutrient for your gut microbiome. We've talked a bunch of times on the show about the health and the importance of the health of the gut microbiome. And butyrate is a really important fatty acid. It's a 4-carbon chain fatty acid, and it's produced by fermentation of certain types of fiber in the diet. So the body makes it, but you could also take it in supplement form. But anyhow, that's a short chain fatty acid. The medium chain fatty acids are basically C6 to C12, and I'll go back to those in just a moment. And then the long chain fatty acids are from C13 and higher, and that group includes things like so when you get fish oils, and sometimes you might see on the fish oil label, it'll say EPA and DHA. That stands for icosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid. And the EPA and DHA are these long chain fatty acids. So they all have different attributes and they all have different purposes for the body, but that's just a quick breakdown on that. But I wanted to spend more time on talking about the medium chain triglycerides. So these are the C6, C8, C10, and C12. And again, the C is carbon, so it tells you how many carbon molecules make up the length of that particular fatty acid. So the other name for C6 is caproic acid. And this probably has the least amount of health benefits. These medium chain triglycerides are found naturally occurring in nature. And they're found in certain things like dairy foods. Pretty low percentage of medium chain triglycerides in dairy products. Much, much higher in coconut and things like coconut oil. So the C6 caproic acid is actually pretty low in coconut oil. Can't find much of it in there. And as far as the research goes, there's not as much research on C6, on that particular short chain or medium chain fatty acid. And then there's C8, which is caprylic acid. And caprylic acid, or C8, has a ton of research behind it. And I'll circle back to that in just a sec. And then C10 is capric acid. And C10 and C8 are probably the two most therapeutic of the medium chain triglycerides, or MCTs. And then there's C12, which is called lauric acid. And lauric acid has kind of a whole separate set of health benefits. Just to mention that one real quick, basically lauric acid has been studied for its antimicrobial properties. Antimicrobial means that it helps to go after certain bacteria and viruses. The way that the research kind of indicates that it works is it seems to bind to the fatty acid layer on the outside of certain pathogens like viruses, and it renders that virus inactive. And so it kind of helps your body support the immunity so that it can decrease excessive growth of these pathogens. So that's why we call it antimicrobial. So that's lauric acid. There's a derivative of lauric acid that some people have probably taken as a supplement called monolaurin. And monolaurin is oftentimes used as an antimicrobial for overproduction of certain types of viruses and so forth. But lauric acid actually makes up a very large percentage of just raw coconut oil. So I've seen anywhere between 40 and 50% of coconut oil is this lauric acid, which is probably why we see certain health benefits of just taking coconut oil all by itself. But when we're able to extract and strengthen, let's say purify and kind of potentiate a particular extract like the C8 or the C10, like C8 for example, probably only makes up about 6 to 8% of coconut oil, and the C10 or the capric acid probably also only makes up maybe 8 to 10% of coconut oil. So in coconut oil, those things they're kind of a minimal contribution to overall coconut oil, but when they extract it, they're able to concentrate it, and that concentrated C8 and C10 has some pretty cool health benefits. And so I just wanted to mention a few of those health benefits, just so when you hear people talking about MCT oils, you can kind of understand maybe how it's working in the body. And so I'll talk about three main things. And there's papers and papers that are written about this, so we can certainly mention a lot more, and we can really get stuck down in the weeds of how it really works biomechanically and biochemically in the body, physiologically. But let me just mention a few just kind of straight off the top. One of the things is that MCTs pretty quickly get metabolized into ketones. And if you've been listening for a while to the show, I've talked about ketones on many occasions, and I'll continue to mention more and more about ketones as we learn more about how ketones work in the body. But ketones are a naturally derived substance in the body, especially when the body is low on glucose and carbohydrates, and we get low on glycogen, which is stored up glucose. Then the body starts to metabolize fats as a fuel source for the production of ketones, because ketones could also enter the mitochondria and produce energy, or ATP. And the research is suggesting that ketones are actually a much cleaner burning fuel than glucose for the production of ATP. So we're very interested in that. But also, so that's one of the things, is that MCTs very readily get converted into ketones, and these ketones are just a powerhouse of energy production, and also lots of interesting other benefits. But that's just number one, is ketone production, particularly C8 or the caprylic acid very readily gets converted into ketones. And that's number one. Number two is that they're immune supporting. I mentioned briefly about C12 or lauric acid, and lauric acid has some really nice antimicrobial effects, but so does C8 and C10. The caprylic acid and the capric also are really antimicrobial, so they can really help to keep in check certain viruses and bacteria and other pathogens. So that's important for nearly every organ system in the body, but at the very least it's immune supportive, let's call it. So they produce ketones, they are immune supportive, and they, probably the thing that I'm most excited about, and where a lot of research is really happening, is the effect on the cells, and particularly the mitochondria. When we consume these fatty acids, it helps to improve mitochondrial biogenesis. Mitochondrial biogenesis is basically the production of new mitochondria. Mitochondria, if you remember, are the little engines in all of our cells. And the more engines that we have in our cells, the more energy is produced in that cell. So these little engines produce ATP, which is kind of the main energy source to make the cells work right. If the cells are working right, then the whole organ system that those cells make up works better. So let's just take the brain, for example. Each neuron of the brain, so a brain cell is called a neuron, and these neurons contain, like hundreds of these mitochondria. But for a variety of reasons, if our blood sugar metabolism isn't working right, which is oftentimes kind of blamed on the etiology of things like Alzheimer's and dementia, that if the energy system isn't working right, those mitochondria start to not work, and then you get death of the neuron. If we start getting dying neurons, we're going to have cognitive issues, neurodegenerative issues, neuroinflammation. That can lead to a whole host of symptoms, not only at the brain level, but the whole body as well, because the brain controls everything that happens below the neck. So the health of the brain is really important for the health of the entire body. So if we got to keep these neurons healthy, and we're in the age where a lot of people, as the boomer generation is getting older, everybody's concerned about getting Alzheimer's and dementia, and some of that generation already have started to develop these cognitive issues. And so it's a big concern. And so to be able to take something as simple as MCTs to boost up mitochondrial biogenesis, in other words, it helps to increase the production of mitochondria in the brain, there's very little out there that we can take that can actually do this. So it's pretty fantastic. And by being able to improve the quality and the number of mitochondria in the neurons, that's going to help to keep that neuron living longer and functioning better. So those are the key kind of things I wanted to mention. Increases ketones. We can talk for an hour just about the importance and the health benefits of increasing ketones in general. It helps with the immune system and the kind of antimicrobial effect, and it helps with mitochondrial biogenesis. That's what these MCTs really do in the system. So you can get MCTs just as a supplement. Lots of companies make MCT oil or MCT powder. Even just taking coconut oil, you'll get at least a certain percentage, a little bit lower on some of the MCTs, but that's one way you can actually increase a little bit of it. And you could really start to support these mechanisms that we just talked about. So anyhow, I just wanted to give you a little primer on if you start to hear people talk about MCTs, you have a little bit of an idea of what they're talking about. And so it's something that I think is going to get more and more popular, more well understood. And there's certainly a ton of research that's being done on the health benefits. So we'll keep bringing you that information as it gets published. And until then, keep it real.